I started.
Well, good morning to everyone. Thanks for coming.
I don't know.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Sorry for the delay. We had to move the room. It's much better here than down at the pickup theater. It is with great pleasure and honor to open this training school for Spain in this beautiful and warm city of Valencia. We really thank the Department of Geography and History for having us here and organizing everything for us. Also the sponsors, the Coast, Sustain, and the FAO, the Ministry of Agriculture, National Food Quality of the Netherlands, the Swiss Confederation, the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment of Western Australia, and the International Union of Soil Science and the Global Soil Partnership. Lastly, thanks a lot to all the trainees that came from Western Australia for this and for the meeting. Basa Bruning, Andres Farah, and Jorge Barros-Salens, he's going to join a bit later, and Meizam as well, who's going to be the last training for the day. I'm really sure that it will be a really fruitful training for all of us. And before I give the floor to Ed to start, let me note you that in the following week or 10 days, we're going to send the certificate of participation to all of you by email, so you can have that as well. Toilets at the other end of the floor. The first ones are for the men, the other side is for the ladies. So, Ed, you can start. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
I was fine.
There's someone here. What do you want to say?
Oh, more coming in.
This the front, the children.
Okay. All right. So my name is Ed. I come from Australia, and it's wonderful to be here. I work a lot trying to provide advice to farmers about what they can do with saline land. And over the years, I've come to the conclusion that often when we look at saline land, we think of the land as being affected by one stress. And in fact, it's affected by many stresses. And I want to talk about primarily about the two stresses that I think are most important today, and then how you can put that together to give advice to farmers. Yeah. So the way that I approach this is that I'm looking to build capacity in early career researchers and also in facilitators, people who are providing advice to farmers. All right. So when I'm thinking of my customers, I'm not thinking so much as the farmer themselves, but people providing that advice. And I want to give you some tools that help you do that slightly better. So, thank you for coming. Okay. No, that is obscuring my. Can we pop that?
No, I can.
Yeah, just. Oh, perfect. Okay. So, over the last couple of years, I've been writing a book called Living with Salinity, understanding how salt, water, and soil can help farmers grow better crops. And I'm still testing its relevance. So this is why I'm here. I'm still testing whether this is any good. As I said, my main audiences for this book are extension officers, early career researchers. And it's got a chapter plan like this. This is what it is at the moment. It hasn't yet been published, but it will be. And here's the thing. If you want a copy, give me your name and address, and I'll make sure you get one. Okay? And I'm going to talk about a little bit about these 4 areas in the book. Salinity in plants, effects on plants, crop salt tolerance, waterlogging salinity interactions, and then what we're calling the CRAM framework. And what that is, you'll get a sense of in a minute. So, what's saltland? What's saltland? What's saltland for you? What's saltland? What is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? Come on, we're not going to get very far. People, we have to talk. We have to talk. This is training. You're training me. There are solutes in the soil. All right. Okay. So we've got salt in the soil, which is causing problems. What else? What else have we got? We have high concentration. Right. We got the salt. What else is in this soil? What's caused the problem? It depends on what you want to grow. Yes, all right. I like this. I like where you're going with this. Okay, so for one person, the salt is not a problem, but for another person, the salt is a problem. So it's about the concentration really matter. Anything else? What else have we got? A drought problem. I like where you're going with that. That's something we're going to pick up on in a minute. Okay? So, yeah, drought is really important. The water content in the soil is really important. All right. So, here's some saltland. This is in Pakistan. It's a waterlogged stand of calla grass, which I took in 1986, my first visit to Pakistan, and my hair wasn't this color. More recent photograph near Tando Muhammad Khan, just a couple of years ago. You can see all this white stuff on the surface of the soil, but there's actually water here. Thanks, Barn. That's all. Great. Here's a saline school in Western Australia. Okay, here the salinity is caused by very shallow water tables, and you can see that in fact there are pools of water at the surface of this salt lake. And here's a dead tree in a dry saline river, again in Western Australia. I'm going to have 4 things during this. We're going to talk about the causes of the adverse effects of salinity on plants, those osmotic effects and toxicity effects. I'm going to talk about waterlogging and inundation as things that you need to add to salinity to get a better handle on how plants respond in these environments. I'm going to talk about the tolerances of plants to salinity and waterlogging. And I'm going to finish with this new framework that we're calling CRAM, which is about getting the right plant into the right place. Okay, now, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, but fortunately, I've been rescued. One of the things I often do when I'm with students is that I'll have a bowl of soil like this, and I'll be stirring it around. And I'll say to the students, how much salt do you think I need to put into this bowl to make it too saline for the growth of wheat? And I'll have some salt. It's in my room. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. So I'll pour some salt in, and I'll give it a stir. And I'll say, do you think that's enough? And salt. Yeah, please. I think that's it. And some people will say, yeah, that's enough to stop wheat growing. And I'll say, no, here's the thing. I could put in all this salt, and I could put another one there, and it's still not saline enough to kill wheat. What am I doing wrong? Someone will say, you haven't put in any water. And I'll say, yes, we haven't put any water. Now it's too saline for the growth of wheat. Great question. Because it is not the concentration of salt in the soil that affects plant growth. It is the salt concentration in the soil solution that affects plant growth. Yeah? So it's really important to hold that in your mind. Yeah? So, it's a trick question. Plant growth is not affected by the salinity of the soil, but by the salinity of the soil solution. Yeah? What that means is that the answer depends not only on the concentration of salt in the soil, but also depends on the concentration of water. All right? And we can make a soil twice as toxic to the growth of wheat by putting in twice as much salt. But we can also make the soil twice as toxic for the growth of wheat by putting in half the amount of water. And in environments in which we can irrigate the soils every day, this doesn't matter. But I've never come across one of those environments where we irrigate the soils every day. I work in environments where we might irrigate the soil maybe 4 times in a growing season. Yeah. So on the day that the irrigation water is applied, the salinity of the soil solution is at a relatively low level. But with time, as the soil dries out, the salinity of the soil solution is becoming more and more and more hostile. And then irrigate again, it does it again. Yeah. Got it? So we can double the stress on plants by doubling the amount of salt in the soil and also by halving the amount of water in the soil. The salinity factor that affects the growth of plants is the salinity of the soil solution. If you remember one thing today, and it's that, we will have not wasted our time. Okay. Now, so I'm now going to talk about the causes of the adverse effects of salinity on plants. While you guys were recovering from last night's dinner by sleeping in, I made this cell this morning, my bathroom. Okay, and you can see that it is a cell that I've made out of dialysis tubing, and it's got green stuff in it because plants are green. There's no other reason. And what we're going to do is we're going to put that in there, and we're going to take this water, which is not green. It's highly saline, and we're going to pour that over there, and we'll check in on that later. Yeah. Right. So, an artificial cell, some saline water. Here it is on the screen. That's just actually water and a green dye. And we have a membrane around the outside. We're putting it in saline water. And what we are going to find is because there's a large difference in the salt concentration between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, osmosis is going to cause this cell to lose volume. All right? And it'll do that up to a point, and then it'll stop. We'll return to this soon. Salinity has two effects on plants. There's the osmotic. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so think of this as a cell. Here's the cytoplasm. Here's the vacuole. You've got the tonoplast here and the plasmalemma here. And the osmotic effect is that water is being sucked out of that cell by osmosis, right? And the adaptation to that is that we restore solutes on the inside here and here. And that's a process called osmotic adjustment. And the toxicity effect is because nearly all the metabolic reactions that are important in the cell are occurring in the cytoplasm, this zone. And when we expose plants to salt, ions are entering into the cytoplasm and from there into the vacuole. And that has toxic effects, particularly on the metabolic processes that are occurring in here. And the adaptation there is either to keep the ions out, which most glycophytes do. They have defense mechanisms for keeping ions out of cells, or else they make sure that anything that goes into here in the way of sodium chloride is quickly shunted into the vacuole. All right? So there is 150 years of plant physiology on one slide. These are the two mechanisms that are really, really important. Halophytes particularly use the process of compartmentation, making sure that the sodium and chloride concentrations inside the vacuole are at nearly the same concentrations as they are outside. That's how halophytes work. Glycophytes work by salt-sensitive plants, work by trying to keep salt out. And that exposes the plants to more osmotic effects. Yeah? So it's a balancing act. The different plants are adapted to handling this in different ways. If you add salt to a plant, this is a graph of shoot growth against time, perhaps over a period of days. As soon as you add the salt, the growth rate goes down, right? That's an osmotic effect. And there's a period of time in which those osmotic effects predominate. And then later, if this plant is a salt excluder, some's still getting through, it's accumulating in the leaves, you start to get toxicity effects, and those toxicity effects are threatening growth, photosynthesis goes down, you get toxic effects later. So if we could osmotically adjust our plants, we would have that dotted green line. And if we could avoid the toxicity effects, we would have that green line. So that the plant has good ion exclusion, or the plant osmotically adjusts. And obviously, what we want is combinations of both things. All right, let's look at plant tolerance to salinity. What are the limits in terms of plant tolerance to salinity? If I keep adding salt to water until I can't get it to dissolve anymore, yeah, so that's 100% on this. That's salinity as a percent of saturated solution. You can basically keep adding salt. We get to about 360 grams of salt per litre. Salt's really soluble, but there comes a point at which it stops. Yeah? So about 360 grams a litre, that's the limit. The most extremely salt-tolerant plants that we have start to grow with salinities of the soil solution about 45% of saturation. Here's seawater. most crops sort of come in about there. Yeah. So here's a reality check. Here, nothing grows. Here we can grow very salt-tolerant plants called halophytes. And this is where we make money. Yeah. And I think if you were to ask me a decade ago what my personal career goal would be, it would have been to move that arrow from maybe there to about there. Yeah, that's sort of what's achievable with better technology. These days, if you were to ask what my career goal is, my career goal is to talk to you guys. All right.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, interrupt.
Thanks. That previous one is very visually appealing, of course, but how much of the Earth's salt-effective lands are in this right-hand side of your extreme part of the graph?
Fortunately, not much. Fortunately, not much. And not much where we're trying to practice agriculture. Arid soils, yes, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's still important, I think, to have a sense of the big picture. Right? So that's why I use that. Yeah. All right. Okay. So here's one way that we can show differences in crop salt tolerance. All right. So these are different varieties of cereals and grasses related to cereals. All right. We've got sea barley grass here, tall wheat grass here. Here's barley. Here's red wheat. Here's durum wheat. All right. And this is increasing salinity. And if you shoot growth at 3% of maximum. Right. Now, you look at that, there's a hell of a lot of dots on that. There's a lot of points here. How do we find ways of summarizing all of that, reducing that to a smaller number of points? Let's go. No. All right. If we I can't use this cell, I'll just we can pull that.
Something else. That's mine.
Yeah.
Right now.
Okay, let's
now it works.
hopefully lots of points.
No. Yes.
Yes, excellent. So how do we summarize the data for, say, 100 crops? How do you turn what might be thousands and thousands of points into a few numbers that summarize the information for maybe 100 crops? So here's the approach of these guys called Mars and Hoffman. You've no doubt heard of them. What they do is they look at relative yield here. So this is 100% and that's 0. And they have an increase in salinity here for the ECE. And Baz is going to tell you a little bit about what the ECE is in the next lecture. And what they do is they define a threshold at which there is no decrease in growth, and they try and put a line through all of that, and they have a slope function where they then define what the slope is of a line that goes through most of those points, and it's a percent decline in per decisiemens per meter. All right, and that method works really well if you miss out some of the points. All right, so their threshold, the threshold for this data set is 1.6 decisiemens per meter. The slope was 13.1 decisiemens per meter. And that works really splendidly if you don't include those points. Yeah, get rid of the dodgy ones. Scientists have been for ages. Same data set, but the Van Genuchem and Stefan approach is that, in fact, you don't need to get rid of any of the dodgy points. You define a line with a different formula And that's the formula. And it's defined, the formula is defined by two factors. The EC, at which you get a 50% decrease in the yield, which is that. And that's that number, which is 5.85 for this set, and the slope function. And that slope function is not easily determined by that, but what it'll do is it'll change the shape of the curve around its steepness. The slope function could be like that, or it could be like that. Yeah? And these have been published. Okay, so about 100 plants exist at the moment in crop databases where crops have been categorized into sensitive, moderately tolerant, and tolerant. And there are the growth response curves using the Stefan method, the variation Stefan method. Yeah? But we could have also drawn other pockets. But some portions. All these crops were initially established under non-saline conditions. All right. So in all of these experiments, the plants had a holiday under non-saline conditions for about 3 weeks. And then they put the salt on. All right. This is not very realistic with what happens in the field. Well, not my field anyway. Second thing, the crops were salinized with water every 1 to 2 days. Remember the lesson of the boiling? Yeah. They didn't sort of salinize them 4 times in a growing season. They salinized them nearly all the time. So they got good relationships between yield and ECE because they took the water out of the equation, right? So be aware of that. So the soils are wet. And as I said, relationships were established between yield and ECE, and you have to be careful. The ECE is not principal driver of growth for a crop. And crop salt tolerance is assumed to be constant throughout the life of the plant. And I'm not sure that it is. And we've got a number of published data that show that. So just be aware that although these data sets are presented as the gold standard, that there are still issues that you need to be aware of, right? Okay, and so in the book, we've compiled the parameters that you would need to define the response curves and the tolerance ratings for those 100 plants. So, you know, Jerusalem artichoke, you've got a tolerance code here, which could be moderately sensitive, tolerant, moderately sensitive. Okay, you get the gist. And these are the Marsden-Hoffman parameters, and these are the Van Guneuschen-Stefan parameters. And using that, you can recreate what they say are the response curves. Now, who wants to grow a crop that has a low yield? Anyone? Anyone want to grow a crop with a low yield? Nobody wants to grow a crop with a low yield. Right. So all the Marsden-Hoffman curves fall into these categories. So they fall into these categories. This is increasing salinity here. This is relative yield here. But no one wants to grow a crop with a low yield. What you want is the best growth. So don't look down here. Look up here, all right? And then project down. What this is telling you is that if you have a sensitive crop, your ECE values within the context of what they're talking about need to be really, really quite low. Yeah. A moderately sensitive crop, about 5 decisiemens per meter is where, if you had ECE values higher than 5 decisiemens per meter, you'd have quite decreased growth. And even with a tolerant crop, 15 decisiemens per meter is a big number. Yeah, if you want that crop to grow well. If you don't mind the crop growing really, really, really badly, of course you could have 25 decicements per metre. No problem, but it's not going to grow very well, right? So what this means is that we can now start to relate crop growth to a salinity scale, all right? Now, in my universe, non-saline soils are 0 to 2 decicements per metre, slightly 2 to 4, moderately 4 to 8, highly 8 to 16, severely 16 to 32, and extremely greater than 32. Right. Forget all about those high levels. None of our commercial plants are really of interest if the ECs are greater than about 15 decicements per metre. Right? So if we want good growth of any crop, then an ECE of about 15 or 16 decicements per metre is a big number. Right. Now, I want to talk now about salinity waterlogging operations. Now, to make this work, we're going to divide the class into 2 halves, all right? And what I want is for all you guys to hold your breath for the next hour. And I want you guys to look at what happens to me. Everybody. Okay. What are we doing here? What we're doing is we are breathing. We are turning breakfast into energy. We are using oxygen to metabolize food to produce energy, ATP. All right? And if you think about this in terms of glucose, 1 glucose, 36 ATP. Now, if you were able to hold your breath, your rate of energy production would go down 95% within a couple of minutes, right? Fortunately, no one takes this seriously, so it never happens, right? So, but think about what happens now with soils when they get waterlogged. Think about what happens with soils when they get waterlogged. And they're not going to get waterlogged for an hour. They're going to get waterlogged for many days, weeks, months, right? What happens under those situations is that the movement of oxygen into the soil is stopped, largely stopped. Concentrations of oxygen in the soil solution go down to nearly 0 within 2 days due to plant roots taking up the oxygen and also the metabolic activity of bacteria, right? So the oxygen concentrations in the soil go right down. So this is what happens with waterlogging. First 2 days, the soils become oxygen deficient. Now, in saline soils, that energy is used to keep salt out of roots, right? And if salt gets into roots, it's carried up in the transpiration stream and finishes up in shoots, which is a bad thing. Remember what I said about toxicity. So within about 1 to 3 days, we can see increased movement of sodium to the shoots and decreased movement of potassium into the shoots, which is a problem because it's that ratio of potassium to sodium, which is a key driver of growth. As a consequence of that, within about 10 to 15 days, we're starting to see plant growth decreasing, and with sensitive plants, survival is affected after about 30 days. So to sort of illustrate this, I want to show you the results of an experiment that we did with wheat. This was one of the early experiments that I did in my career. We had plants growing under drain conditions. We increased the salinity over a period of about 6 days so that we weren't exposing the plants to a terrible osmotic shock. We then exposed those plants to half the plants to waterlogging, and we took some photos after a month, 33 days. All right, this is what they look like. Oh, here are our salt concentrations, by the way. 0 salt speaks for itself. 2 decicels per metre. That's about 4 times the concentration of salt that you would have in a cup of tea in my city. All right, where I work, Perth. About 4 times the concentration of salt in a cup of tea, and 12 decicels per metre is about 20% seawater. All right, so there we go. There are our salt concentrations. Here are the growth effects. On this side, we have our waterlogged plants, all right? And on this side, we have our drained plants. And what you can see, I'll just take those off again. What you can see is that this is the waterlogging sequence, no salt. These plants are still alive. 2 decicels per metre. 4 times the concentration of salt in my cup of tea. Those plants have taken up so much salt at the end of 33 days that they're dead. Effectively dead. And they won't produce any yield. And these are really dead. Right. Waterlogged, drained. There it is. So it is an interaction between even quite low levels of salt, but with waterlogging, profound effects on growth. Right. Tolerance to waterlogging. I can breathe underwater. I can breathe underwater. I started learning how to breathe underwater when I was 10. Yeah, you can all breathe underwater too. Snorkels. Yeah. Snorkels. Yeah, you swim around. That's not a photo of me. Plants do the same thing. The key adaptation for plants is erenchyma. Erenchyma acts like snorkels. They are hollows in the stems and roots that enable oxygen to be transmitted down the inside of the root to the root tip. Here's what it looks like in corn. Yeah, and this forms as a consequence of the exposure of the plant to waterlogging. This is another plant. This is Melalotus siculus, and it forms this new layer of cells on the outside of the original root, which is highly porous. So plants on the left-hand side aerated, plants on the right-hand side grown under stagnant conditions. And if you look at that under a microscope, you'll see that those phellem cells are highly porous and greater than 50% air, and they will enable the plant to respond. Plants, the tolerance of plants, the ability of plants to produce erenchyma is, for me, the key adaptation that matters when we are talking about waterlogging on salt land. Yeah. So let's check around the picture. So there we go. Remember how wonderful looking that was? Yeah, it's lost a bit of weight. Right? Pop that back and come back to that again.
I'm sorry, can you show it also?
No, you know. Yeah. Okay, everybody out there in watching on TV. There you go.
It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Okay, you can see that it's lost weight. Right?
Okay.
All good?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just pop that back and let that do its thing for a bit longer. Okay. So how are we doing for time? I've probably got another half hour. That all good?
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah.
Good. All right. So what I want to do now is to take the threads that we've talked about and pull them together into a system, which we call CRAM. And CRAM stands for capability, risk, adaptation, and mitigation. Okay. Capability, risk, adaptation, and mitigation. And I can never remember what it stands for. I actually have it written in my mobile phone. It's a conceptual tool that we've developed to try and improve the fit between soils and plants. This is why we invented it. We found that we were failing too often in getting plants to grow in landscapes. This is a site in Pakistan which we sowed Salicornia. Yeah, look at that lush Salicornia. Yeah, nothing's there. This is a site which was sown to cotton. Look how fantastic the cotton is. Yeah, nearly nothing's there. But these are both salt-tolerant plant species, and these are saline soils. There's something that we are missing. Yeah? So CRAN is really answering the question, how can we make better choices, better plant choices, and better management choices? All right, let me give you a sense of management. Here's a farmer experiment with bitter gourd, again in Pakistan. Here, there was a mound with some mulch on the surface of the soil, and here there was a mound without any mulch on the surface of the soil, and bitter gourd was planted on both mounds, right? On both mounds. But these ones died, and these ones were so successful that they invaded the climbing frame for these ones. Yeah? That's telling you something. There is something really important that we need to know here. Management matters, but how do we know that management's going to matter? How could we have told in anticipation that maybe mulches would be a thing to do with this soil? Again, CRAN can help us with that. So no mulch, plants died, mulch on the right-hand side. Yep, and invaded that frame. So we make those better soil management decisions. So, has anyone here tried to help farmer grow something on salt-affected land? Has anyone? Yeah, yeah, yeah. How did it go?
I found the
Yeah.
farmers to grow tomato
Yeah.
in affected land.
Yeah.
Because we went like entropic culture, and we had like a sample.
Yeah.
Tomato in the center, five.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Does it work well?
Sorry?
Does it work?
Yeah, that's well.
Oh, it worked. Excellent. I'm so lucky. I need to hang out with you more. This is how I started. I worked as a saltland agronomist in Western Australia in the 1980s. Yeah? And we would plant saltbush, petrichor species, on a piece of farmland. And we would put up a fence around the outside. And these sites were always near main roads. Yeah, so farmers would drive along and see our stuff growing up. Oh, that looks great. Yeah, so that was the thinking. Let's advertise our success. Okay, and sometimes the stuff really grew, and sometimes it died. And the legacy of this, because we have a fence around it, and the farmers would drive along there and they would see these dead plants with a fence around. Yeah. That legacy lingered, and it lingered. And they were not very happy. They would remember this, and they would say encouraging things to us like, it doesn't bloody work. Yeah. So I wish I was like you. I wish I had your experience. But my experience was that too often fail. Yeah. And I think I learned from that saline agriculture can be hard to get right. And I know that some of the people that I work with in Pakistan and Bangladesh have similar issues. It's hard to get right. And so here's the conversation we'd like to see. There's sort of the agronomist, farmer on the left and the agronomist on the right. Farmer on the left, what can I grow on this salt land? The farmer on the right says, well, we've measured this, this, and this, and we reckon that you can grow tomatoes, whatever it is. Yeah, insert plant here. Yes. So that's a conversation we need to see. And I think this is what we're looking for, an adapted crop for the site conditions. We need to see those things brought together. All right, so, and of course, to create value, to put euros, dollars, rupees into the pocket of the farmer, or food. So what do we mean by an adapted crop? And how do we define soil conditions, site conditions? That's what I get out of that. So let's look at an adapted crop. For me, plant adaptation, and the gift that I want to give to you is that plant adaptation can be defined primarily in terms of tolerance to salinity, but also to waterlogging and inundation. All right? Because these are key things that stress is the key stress that interacts with salt. So let's build ourselves a matrix with salinity tolerance on one scale and tolerance to waterlogging and inundation on the other scale. And so this is sort of the framework that I'm now thinking of for the plant adaptation matrix. Now, these terms, this is increasing salinity tolerance. These terms you've already seen before from that stuff with Mars and Hoffman. Sensitive, moderately tolerant, tolerant. I've added highly tolerant because I'm also interested in halophobia. Now, in terms of waterlogging tolerance, sensitive, moderately tolerant, highly tolerant. All right. So, and this is waterlogging and inundation tolerance. So let's think about how some plants fit into here. Right. That's there the Mars and Hoffman categories. No erenchyma, sensitive. Erenchyma are in response to waterlogging, like that photo I showed you of corn. Yeah. Moderately tolerant. The crop really grows well in waterlogged soils, tolerant. And highly tolerant, perhaps the plant grows in inundated soil. All right, so now, rice. There, it grows in inundated soil, but it's sensitive. Mangroves, highly tolerant. It's a halophyte, and it grows in inundated soil. So we're anchoring these corners of the matrix with rice and mangroves, right? What's this one? This is cotton. Oh, that's wheat, as you would. There's cotton. Cotton is highly salt tolerant, but it's very sensitive to waterlogging. Yeah. Here's wheat. Here's a plant which is really important in Pakistan called kala grass, the flattening footstep. There's chili. Everybody wants to grow chili in Pakistan because it's such an important staple crop. It's very highly valuable, but it's moderately sensitive to salinity and sensitive to waterlogging. So you start to put all this together, you get yourself a combination of plants, and of course most crops fit into here. But you've got a few outliers that give you a wider range of options. Right. All of this is in the book that you're going to put your name down for. Okay, there's a big appendix with all of these rankings for different crops. And of course, we can, because we're only interested in the growth of good crops, you can put your tape with the salinity categories along the bottom, right? Your ECE categories. Right. Now let's think about site conditions. So that's plant adaptation. Now let's think about land capability. Land capability can also be defined primarily in terms of risks. And the risks that we now want to know about are the salinity risk and the water content risk, with water contents going from, say, drought to good conditions and waterlogging and inundation. So think of that as a continuum. Yeah, so you've got salt and water. Again, but now we're thinking of it from the land point of view. right? So we have salinity risk. And for here, we're going to measure the ECE and water content risk. And water content risk has a range of ways that we can start to think about. We could measure the depth of water table. That'll give you a sense of that as a driver. Or you could measure sodicity. Why is sodicity important? Because what sodicity does is that it decreases the permeability of soils to water. So if you then waterlog a sodic soil, sorry, if you irrigate a sodic soil, you waterlog it, right? So sodicity is another one of the factors that affects the waterlogging risk. And irrigation availability is another one of these factors that affects the water content risk. Yeah. So one factor there, three factors there. So risk of salinity, again, I've given you this before, 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, and I don't care what happens at greater than 16 because we're not going to grow crops there, we might grow halophytes there. So that's pretty straightforward. But water content risk. Here's wilting point. Here's fill capacity. Here's, say, where the soils are waterlogged, and here's perhaps where the soils are inundated. Here we've got a risk of dryness. Here, good conditions. Here, perhaps the risk of waterlogging, and here, the risk of inundation. Yeah? And so with depth of water table, if we had water tables at the soil surface, then obviously, in terms of the risk, we're about here. Yeah? If we had a depth of water table maybe at 30 centimetres, then maybe in terms of the risk to waterlogging for most of our crops, we're somewhere between really good conditions and just on the edge of that. You know? And if we had a water table of, say, 2 metres, well, you know, we're down here. The plants are not going to be threatened, the plant roots are not going to be threatened by the presence of a shallow water table. Okay, sodicity, non-sodic soil. Remember I talked to you about the fact that non-sodic soils, water infiltrates freely through the soil, but with sodic soils, that water perches. It can't get all the way through because there's a limitation in permeability. So that's going to cause waterlogging, so sodicity, causing waterlogging. And so I'm thinking that for a non-sodic soil, perhaps we could draw in an irrigated environment, we could draw a risk boundary a bit like this. But for a sodic soil with occasional irrigation, you might draw a risk boundary from dry risk to virtually on the edge of inundation because the water can't infiltrate. Yeah? So, and water content. Can they see that? Okay, and so it's a bit of a new idea that sodicity is an index of the range of variation in water risk. Non-sodic soil, you might have a boundary a bit like that. Yeah, okay, not very sodic. Slightly sodic soil, perhaps a risk boundary that goes from the dry risk to some level of waterlogging, and a moderately or highly sodic soil, you could have a risk boundary that goes over a much wider range. All right, so what we are now going to do is we're going to put the EC and the water risk together. So here's the saltland capability assessment matrix. Okay, we've got increasing salinity here, right? Non-saline, moderately saline, highly saline, severely saline. And we've got the water availability risk here. So I'm going to give you an example where, say, we've got an ECE. We're in Pakistan. We have an ECE of 10 to 15 decisiemens per metre
and we have a soil which is moderately sodic, and irrigation water is scarce, all right? So they're not irrigating it very often. So let's think about how we could define that. We would have the ECE boundaries here, right? That's 10, that's 15. With this SAR, we are going to get, when we irrigate the soil, we are going to have a risk associated with that causes waterlogging. And because irrigation water is scarce, we're going to have really dry conditions at times before the irrigation water is applied, right? So this is the risk boundary for that site. This is the risk boundary. That is what the site can offer a plant. So that's the range of experiences that a plant can experience on this soil. And that's the range of conditions that a plant is going to have to be able to withstand if it's going to survive on this soil. Yeah. So I've had a lot of fun with this. I've started to think about the way in which these risk boundaries play in the different locations that I've worked in internationally. So in Vietnam, we work in environments where the soils are pretty wet, mostly, so they don't have any dry risk, and they're not very saline. We can grow fantastic crops here. You remember on the first day, I talked about how we got 100 tonnes per hectare of beetroot, red beet. Bangladesh, a bit more like that. The soils can be quite dry, and they're more saline. And in southern Pakistan, even more saline and very dry at times. And we work at a place called Tipan Dublo, which is right south of Karachi, and we have desert soil next to mangroves. And so you can start to see how those risks are affecting the sorts of plants that you would grow there. Okay, I now want to talk about soil management. Getting close-ish to the end. Oh, what have I done? There we are. So across our three international projects, we've really been focusing on 4 management options. Shallow drainage, okay? So remember I told you that many of our customers are illiterate, so these are some little things that I drew to try and illustrate what it would be like. Waterlogging, the plant is distressed. We're using emojis to try and convey the stress that the plant is experiencing. And if we could put in a shallow furrow, then we can take that water off and the plant does okay. Mulch, salt accumulates in the soil because it's coming up from the shallow water table into the root zone from evaporation. This is causing a stress to plants. If we use some mulch, we can improve situations because we're decreasing the evaporation at the soil surface. We're keeping the soil hydrated, and we have less salt in the soil, all right? So the lesson of the bowl. The plants are doing better because there's less salt, more water. And if we could put even more mulch on, we get a slightly better benefit. We're seeing this maximised at 5 to 10 tonnes of mulch per hectare. Gypsum is an issue for many of our dispersive soils. The soils are impermeable because of sodicity. Salt accumulates in them, and if we can add gypsum to these soils, we restore soil structure and the plants do well. And mound and furrow irrigation. This is about the fact that if you have a mound like this, the salt tends to accumulate on the top of the mound. And what we do is we get better plant growth when we're growing closer to the water level. Salt and water is moving up to this there. And that's where it's evaporating, right? So each of those management solutions can be also interpreted in the way that it changes the risk boundary of a site. Okay. Remember the red light, the red circle was the circle associated with the original risk. Shallow drainage decreases the look at the blue, decreases the possibility of waterlogging. Gypsum changes the salinity, improves the soil structure, decreases waterlogging, changes the salinity. Mulch maintains soil moisture in the soil and therefore reduces the risk of dryness in the soil and also prevents salinization of the surface soil. So it's moving this line here and here. And mound and furrow irrigation, again, is decreasing the risk of waterlogging because the furrows take the water away, but it is also reducing the risk of salinity. So you can see how soil management options also change the risk boundary. So what we're trying to do, think about the tolerance of the plants, think about what the site has to offer, and then start to think about how you can pull the right plant into the right place. If the site is still not perfect, what are the other management, the soil management things that we can throw on top of that pulls the site back into the sort of frame of the plant, the tolerance of the adaptation of the plant, or do we need to choose a different plant? Okay. So what I'm trying to do here is to help extension officers go and have better informed conversations with farmers. Of course, what the farmer decides to do, the farmer will decide to do. And that's the way it should be. But the farmer, if the farmer is coming to you for advice, then you need tools to explain what is happening and help the farmer to make a better choice. What the farmer decides to do with the advice, that's with the farmer. Right. Now, do we have to make a lot of measurements to diagnose land capability? When I go and visit farms, I don't have an EC meter in my pocket. Sorry, Buzz, I just don't do it. I call reading the landscape. All right. What I do is I walk around and I look at what plants are growing and where they're growing. And the reason that I do this is because the plants, the weeds that grow on a site can be used as indicators of salinity and waterlogging. And I want to share with you this as a final idea. One of the things that we've done is we have developed these cards, which have indicator species on them. One card per species. So photographs on one side and what the species is about on the other side, and then a little map of where it sits in terms of tolerance to salinity and tolerance to waterlogging. If you Google salt deck cards, these will come up as the second item on the Google search, because I did it yesterday. Yeah, and this is the front page of that. But have a look at those. Just pass that around. Just have a look. Yeah. So what I do is I tend to go into a site and look at what I can see. I'm asking myself, what can I learn from the plant species that are present? In Pakistan, callow grass grows on waterlogged soils. It's been widely planted, widely distributed. It's actually not native to Pakistan. You see callow grass growing on soils, you know that soil waterlogs. Sesbania sesban is another plant which is widely grown in Pakistan, and it's become partly indigenized. And again, it grows in areas like the bottom of this irrigation funnel, channel at least, which are waterlogged. So you can learn something by just going around and looking at the weeds. This is a great site. I love this. This is in the upper Yellow River Delta at a place called Yinchuan. And I took this photo of one lonely sunflower plant surviving in a field which had been devastated by waterlogging. You can tell this is an irrigation channel here, and the plant is growing in the highest point in the landscape, where the water was used to irrigate the plants here, and on either side of that channel, you can see that they were just devastated by that combination of stresses. Further away, where there was less influence of the waterlogging, the plants survived, but by God, they didn't look happy, right? So it's not only a question of looking for plants.
Sorry,
but
why this plant has been survived?
It's on an elevated location. There's an irrigation funnel, channel here, yeah, and there's a bund. There's a bund on each side of that irrigation channel, and it's growing on the bund. It's in an elevated location.
Because she hasn't affected the...
And it hasn't been affected by the waterlogging. When they irrigated the site, they over-irrigated it and killed all the plants in the field. This one plant escaped. Yeah, so it was a drainage effect. In effect, it was a drainage effect. Okay, got it? So, read the landscapes. Go into these landscapes, read the landscapes, and as you learn what the plant indicators are and what the visual indicators are, talk to your farmer about that. Because your farmer doesn't have an EC meter in his pocket either. Yeah? He or she is also going to be learning from the visual indicators. So, in summary, plant adaptation is defined in terms of the tolerances of plants to waterlogging and salinity. Land capability can be defined in terms of the risks of salinity and waterlogging and inundation. And these risks can be used to define a risk boundary. And what we need to do is to reconcile the risk boundary with the adaptation of the plant that the farmer wants to plant. Yeah? And soil management strategies can change the risk boundary. Oh, and let's have a final look at the artificial cell. You can see, yeah, the artificial cell is lost about 40%. So it's water. It always gets to the stage where it loses 40%. Because as the water is leaving the cell, the salt is going in, the cell is osmotically adjusting. So this is actually a good point to finish on, because we have now come full circle. Thanks for the chance to do this. I really appreciate it. Oh, question?
Questions, yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this fantastic lecture, not just on, well, content, but also how to lecture, a lecture on how lecturing is done. It was a great lecture, but so one question, because your two-axis thing, salt tolerance, waterlogging tolerance, is waterlogging the best possible term? Because as far as I understand it, it's both about tolerance to too much water, but also too little. Both of those boundaries fall within your
it's water content.
Water content. Okay.
Yeah, it's water content. It's water content. It's water drought. It's water drought. Yeah, and you're right. And maybe that's the kind of feedback I'm looking for, because the book is getting stone. So water drought. Yeah, but it's water content. Against salt. Yeah. And what we, I think, have done, and because we've come out of this tradition of Mars and Hoffman, we've said it's the salt that matters. Okay. Well, of course, salt matters if you irrigate your plants every 2 days. Water doesn't matter. But in the real world, it ain't like that. In the real world, salt water content changes. And in most of the environments in which I work, the plants might get, a crop might get 3, 4 irrigations if you're lucky in 100 days. Yeah. So, and we don't think of that. We think, oh, the Americans, they know it's all that's you know, Riverside. It's the holy place. Yeah. Be careful. That's, I think, my take on this. Yes.
So I wanted to ask, have you ever tried to prove those indicator species, using remote sensing?
Such a good question. The trouble with remote sensing is the footprint is really, you'd need a lot of indicators to, no, the answer is no. No, when you see me in the field, and tomorrow you'll see me in the field, perhaps if you're on the field trip, I'm doing this. My interest is a really fine scale. No, the answer to your question is no. We could do it. We could do it if we started to use crops as indicators. Yes, because that's when you get large areas of a single, a pixel in some of the satellites is an area of 25 meters by 25 meters. Yeah, so you could do it, and I know guys who are trying to assess, say, the recent floods in Pakistan, the severity of the recent floods in Pakistan, again, using things that you can see with satellites. With salinity, I know that you can assess areas affected by severe salinity, because there are changes in NDVI, which you can pick up with satellites. But no, I haven't seen it done with a level of subtlety that I think I'm trying to aim for here, where the choice is not between having something that's green or bare, but the choice might be different species, and I haven't ever seen that done. And I don't know if it's possible with the current technology to do that. But thank you for that question. It's a good question.
Yeah, I was wondering, based on your experience in South African areas, next to water content and salinity, what is most important? Maybe
you start to get into a range of other factors like texture. I think texture starts to become fairly important. Yeah, what's the next generation of things that matter? Texture and nutrients, probably. But I think that that's the best I can do with that. The short answer is I don't know.
Well, or a farmer's preference. That's also the thing. Like,
well,
market value, that kind of thing.
We have to work with farmer preferences, and we have to work in the context of what a farmer can sell. Market chains are incredibly important. Market chains can be very local. They can be, I will grow this and I will sell it to my neighbour, or I will grow this and I will sell it to the next village. Or they can be, I will grow this to be exported to Australia. Livelihoods are about being able to make living. So the book is called Living with Salinity. Living with Salinity. That's our aim. Our aim is to help farmers make better choices, but finally the choice to sit at the time. Yeah, it's their choice. My job is not to say to a farmer, you should grow this. My job is to go to a farmer and say, I think your land has this kind of capability, and of the plant species that you want to grow, here are a range of plants you could try there. If you want to grow that one, it's a bit more salt sensitive than that one. And if you want to grow that one, I would suggest you put on a foliage as well, so that the land becomes less fertile. So my job is not to make farmer choices. My job is to help farmers make better choices. Yeah. Sorry, there was another question. Yes.
Thank you for the lecture. It was really, really nice. And my question is about the equation you mentioned, the mass and bulk count, and the other one. Those equations, of course, differ for every crop with those families.
Yes.
And those equations can describe the tolerance of the crop to the osmotic effect and also the toxic effect?
Yes, it's a combination of both. Yes, so these have been derived from experiments in which they have just exposed, they've grown the plant under non-saline conditions to get it established, and then they have set the salinity for the rest of the duration of the crop's life. And so it is the combination of both the osmotic and the toxic effects, and that's what they get. All right.
Let's say the first threshold would be the osmotic effect. Like
in their hands, the threshold is the concentration of salt that you can have in the soil, that up to which it has no effect.
Exactly.
Okay, there is no adverse effect on the yield, and then after that, you add salt in excess of the threshold, the yield declines. All right.
Yes.
Now, this kind of approach I don't completely like, which is why I'm more like the Stefan Van Ganuchen approach, which says that just the curve is continuous, but it is just very flattish at the top end, and it comes down, and then it becomes very flattish at the bottom end. Yeah? That's the, and for me, that's intuitively nicer, because I don't believe that nature has sharp corners. I think that nature has trends, curves,
But the longer the curve goes, like you said, that the more tolerance to toxic effects we have the plant, or not?
Probably the plants that are tolerant are the plants that have greatest tolerance to toxic effects. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So in another question, talking about the soil tolerance. So I was wondering if you or anyone else is aware of a suitable database or reference that is not only looking at the species level, but at the intraspecific level.
So there's a database called CAGOF, which you'll find in the USDA website associated with the Riverside Lab. So that gives you a range of species and talks about big picture stuff, but the level that you're looking at of halophytic responses at the intraspecific level.
Not necessarily at the,
but even at the genus level.
Conventional crops as well. Because I'm aware that there's, I think, research is more and more trying to look for.
People are trying to do that, but I'm not aware of compilations of this, and it's a thing that needs to be done. It is a thing that needs to be done. For example, people are now, and you guys know.
We've got one publication where we looked at statistically significant differences between potato varieties.
Correct.
Yes. But as far as I know, the only one that looks at within one species at different varieties and try to, really separate them and be from a statistical. Significant point.
Exactly. People have worked with tomatoes, and there have been people who've dropped genes into wheat and so on to improve salt tolerance. But the depth of work in this area is still very shallow. What we need is a new generation of researchers, guys, new generation of researchers to really do a lot more work in this space. Because obviously, if we can, we're not interested in average plants, we're interested in exceptional plants. And there are opportunities, I think, to genetically improve and select plants that have specific adaptations. In Australia, I've been associated with a group that has selected higher nutritive value old man saltbush plants as fodders for sheep. Most old man saltbush plants are rubbish in terms of their nutritive value for sheep. We started with 60,000 plants and we selected the best, one of the best two, and that's been cloned and that's now been spread commercially. So it's a terribly important question you're asking. At the moment, it's very clunky and it's very plants, we are not looking adequately at variation within schools.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention my neighbor's work. But you're much more expert than that.
But by the way, as was important, and first of all, I need to thank you for the fabulous lecture. It was a elevated training overall. And then I have a question in the light of recent climatic trends in places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran. In the middle of the summer, we have flood one day, waterlogging, and the day after we have extreme heat, and salinity is already there.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you speculate the combination of these factors affects plant growth?
Lethal.
Lethal.
One of the last lines of defense that plants have, if they lose control of the movement of ions into the roots, one of the last lines of defense is to close the stomates. And one of the things that you'll find in many plants when they get waterlogged is that the stomates close. Now, that's how plants cool themselves by evaporating water from the leaves. And if you've closed the stomates, the plant is cooked by elevated temperatures and it dies. One of the most interesting signs of waterlogging damage in the plants that I'm interested in, the salt bushes, is that the leaves bleach. And the bleaching occurs as a consequence of the fact that the soil waterlogged, the stomates close, the plant is no longer able to cool, and the leaves go white. And on the sunny side of the plant, you'll see all these white leaves, and on the shady side of the plant, the leaves might still be green. So, but that combination of stresses is lethal.
So, as a future advisor or extension officer or whatsoever in those regions, when the farmer is coming to me and asking, what should I grow? What should I say? What should I answer?
I would be saying, if your plant is susceptible to waterlogging, put the drains in at the start of the growing season, irrespective of whether it is waterlogged at that time or not. Because when the waterlogging comes, it's too bloody late. You can't do it then.
No.
Yeah. So one of the things that we are doing with farmers in Bangladesh who want to grow sunflowers is we say, plant your sunflowers, make the furrows for the, so the beds might be this wide. and between each bed, make a furrow. Not very deep, about that deep, yeah? And then put on the mulch. The furrow is not there to handle the flood every year. It's there to handle the flood in the year that the flood occurs. Yeah. So it's thinking about insurance. Yeah.
So I think I missed that detail. Were these fields where you work always like they've always been saline soils and waterlogged, or did they become over time? And if so, what were the causes?
They tend to become saline over time, and they become saline because there is always a small amount of salt in the irrigation water, or because there is seawater intrusion. So often salinization is a consequence of man-made activities. Okay, you irrigate, or you have an irrigation channel which leaks, and water table comes up to the soil surface, that causes salinity. You apply saline water to a soil, the soil is sodic or becomes sodic, that causes salinity. Or you have seawater rise, intrusion, that causes salinity. So again, talk about that in the book, which is off the topic. It's in my marketing strategy. So many causes. Nearly all the landscapes that I work in, the salinity is at adequate levels for crop growth. So it means they're on the edge, and how farmers manage those soils then determines whether that goes over the edge or if they can continue to use it. Management's critical.
If the problem is irrigation and agriculture, would it be a strategy to passively leave the field untouched for some years? Would it become?
But if you left it untouched for years and you had a shallow water table, you'd have that capillarity occurring, salt deposition at the soil surface. I often find that it's the abandoned land which is the land which becomes most saline and most unusable. Often it is the use of land, it's the curation of the land, it's the management of the land that helps sustain its utility. It's really interesting. I would be very reluctant to say to a farmer, don't do anything on that land, unless the land was what I call in Australia deeply and profoundly stuffed. If it is really, really, really saline, yeah, okay. But otherwise, it is the management of the land that can help sustain it. We're eating into bonus time. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the chance to do it.